Welcome on into a very big BKL Nightly. I'm Thad Brown, Rachel Liebert with me today. Terry Pegula, Brandon Beane addressed the media regarding the 2025 season, Sean McDermott being fired, a whole lot to get to today. We're going to jam as much as we can into this 30 minutes, so let's not mess around at all. Let's get right to why Sean McDermott was fired, and the answer was pretty simple. Terry Pegula saw some unhappy faces, and it changed his mind seemingly about what was going on. This was not a decision made based on weeks of consideration. It was not about intricate research in terms of personnel department versus coaching staff. It was what Pegula experienced in that locker room Saturday after the Bills loss, and he did take the time to explain and describe what that was like.
First thing I noticed was our quarterback with his head down, crying. I looked at all the other players. I looked at their faces and our coaches. I walked over to Josh. He didn't even acknowledge I was there. First thing I said to him, I said, "That was a catch." We all know what I'm talking about. He didn't acknowledge me. He just sat there sobbing. He was listless. He had given everything he had to try to win that game. And looking around, so did all the other players on the team.
Part of the reason we're here stinks because we have to discuss, what happened this week, moving on from a head coach. I bear guilt, blame, responsibility. There's no finger pointing. I understand there's things I could have done better.
I felt like we hit the proverbial playoff wall year after year. 13 seconds, missed field goals, the catch. So I just sensed in that locker room, like, where do we go from here with what we have?
So the joke kind of going around today was, if only Josh Allen had spoken to Terry Pegula, Sean McDermott would still be here, right? Give me your reaction to the reason we wondered why now, why make this call. We got that answer today.
It seems very like a very just rash decision. I don't love that he didn't give he gave an answer. If that's truly what it was, this was I saw the locker room upset and that made me realize this needed to happen now. Okay, that's your answer. But it feels like I'm almost wanting more of the story or more of what led to this decision, and we really didn't get that. I mean, it also in the same breath too, I don't know if he even mentioned it in that, he said it was a catch. Okay, so you're saying it is a catch, but then you fire your head coach of a call that wouldn't be your head coach's fault. It's just a very, very interesting approach. I don't love, it doesn't make me feel any more confident in this decision, the answer that he gave in that soundbite.
I will say that you can have a situation where you realize that now is the time, where maybe there's an argument for Sean McDermott being dismissed any number of years in the last couple here. He's had plenty of chances. There's no doubt about that. And just because it was a rash decision, just because it was kind of top of the head, he said that there was no thought about doing it before he walked into the locker room on Saturday night. There was no changing of his mind after he walked in that locker room Saturday night. I think you can live with that in terms of this needed to happen, and this was just the kick in the butt for Terry Pegula to finally make it happen. If it were me, I would have analyzed this up and down,
Sat
spent
on it a little
weeks,
bit longer,
yeah,
maybe.
exactly, thought about who's available, what my pros and cons are, all that stuff. It doesn't make my approach any more right or wrong than Terry Pegula's approach. It is his team. He can do what he wants. At the end of the day, the decision is going to be weighed on, it's going to be determined in terms of the success of who the next coach is. But if this is what it took, this is what it took. It's not the way I would do it, but I'm not totally against it being the way that Pegula finally decided to make that decision.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, if there is that defining moment of having the realization, I get it. And Sean McDermott hasn't taken them to the Super Bowl. And that was kind of the point of the conversation is we're in this playoff. We hit the playoff wall. He kind of reiterated that a few times. But it still feels just, you see your team upset and then that's the defining moment. It feels like, it doesn't, I want to say a cop-out answer, but it does feel like kind of just an easy answer to say, well, the team was upset. Josh Allen's over here crying, and I realized there needed to be a change. I'm not saying he didn't have that clarity in that moment, but it just still feels like a weird realization to come to in that moment.
Analyzing the truthfulness of it is something I haven't really thought of today. Because I kind of, the reason is, if I'm going to not give the real answer, that's not what I'm coming up with. I'm going to say
that's why I
that,
think it is his real answer, which is not concerning, but just like, I just keep saying the word weird. It's just a weird, like that.
It is.
That was the moment.
Look, when you're a billionaire, okay, I am of the opinion when you're a billionaire and you've done something that 99.999% of the world can't do, which is make $1 billion.
Yeah.
You don't care. You do what you want. And not only that, I think you might feel more confident about a decision like that than the average person would. Regardless, it's his team. He can do what he wants. And it's not like there's no argument for this at all. It's just surprising the methodology with what you went about doing it. All right. So there was a thought that this was Brandon Beane going behind Sean McDermott's back to engineer a power play, a dismissal at two brute, that kind of stuff. And if we believe what Terry Pegula's story was about how he made the decision, that goes out the window right away, because you can't have Brandon Beane engineering a decision that the owner just kind of came up with on his own Saturday night. Regardless, when the two guys talked about that today, and I want to, play those sound bites right now, this was about the most heated they got during this press conference was addressing why a power play was never something that was ever going to happen.
I'm the kind of guy, if I sense you're on a power play, you're out. I don't like power play people. We have an organization we work together, but any sense at all that he was on a power play, he would have been gone.
Those are harmful things that, I walk in the door and my wife's got tears coming down her face for stuff like that. And I'm going to damn try hard to win a Super Bowl here. I am. But for somebody to question my character like that, it is BS.
Of all the things that happened in that press conference, when you talk about what do you believe, and I'm sure there are some things that were spun, and we're going to get to something that we have a real big discussion about how much we believe it in a minute here. That's the one I'm going to believe the most. The idea that fans would think that Beane would do this on his own, it was just out of character for Beane. From what I've known of the guy, he's very stand up. He's a good people person. He seems like a good guy. I don't think he would do that. And it didn't, like I said, didn't make sense with the way he's been. The other part of this too is that I just don't think that there was an opportunity for him to, I guess there was an opportunity, but I will say this, subconsciously, I wouldn't be surprised if Terry Pegula, who sits next to Brandon Beane in the owner's box all the time and gets to know Brandon Beane and is more comfortable with Brandon Beane, when it came to A or B, without even thinking about it, he might pick Brandon Beane because Brandon Beane had been talking in his ear all this time anyway. But this was not something that I think Beane would have done. And the fact that the circumstances of the decision supported that makes me buy it 100%.
I don't think Beane orchestrated this in any way either, but it does, to your point of, saying Beane and Pegula were in the press box together, they had spent more time together. This press conference to me felt like you could tell that. I mean, it kind of felt like we're taking the blame off of Brandon Beane. And like you said, it's not a fair judgment for people to think that he was, trying to manipulate his way into getting a promotion or trying to get McDermott fired. But I do think the way this is presented in this press conference, just how they go back and forth, at least on Pegula's side, I think Brandon Beane had a better press conference overall than Pegula did today. But just on his side, it does feel like I'm here to defend him. And while that might be true and that isn't his character, and, I do believe that, it still feels like Pegula is in the two of McDermott and Beane. He's choosing Beane's side in this. I mean, obviously he did. He fired one and promoted the other. But it does feel like, not the power play, but I feel like the power play maybe leans more into the Pegula relationship more than how Brandon Beane did or didn't, orchestrate a promotion and McDermott being fired out of this.
They talked later about the relationship. We might get to that soundbite too in this show, that they really still, from Beane's point of view, they were still getting along and working together. It wasn't described as a great relationship. Not that it wasn't described as not a great relationship, but it wasn't like they were not getting along to the point where Bean would want to make this happen. I will say, when you work in the NFL, which of course stands for not for long, and you do one of these jobs, again, subconsciously, there's like a survival instinct to where people were wondering, why is McDermott saying these things in the media? It might be because he had a suspicion of this. It might also be because just as a coach, you want to make sure that everybody knows it ain't my fault. And if you're the GM, you might, even without thinking, say something to the owner about, hey, just so you know, it ain't my fault, without being direct about it. Just how these guys are totally wired. Now, the highlight of the press conference today, outside of the Sean McDermott stuff, was a conversation about Keon Coleman. And it really wasn't a Keon Coleman conversation. It was a question about the receivers in general and Keon in particular to Brandon Bean. The funny thing about it was that's when Terry Pegula decided to step in with this thing that everybody is talking about.
Yeah, I mean,
Can I interrupt? I'll address the Keon situation. The coaching staff pushed to draft Keon. I'm not saying Brandon wouldn't have drafted him, but he wasn't his next choice. That was Brandon being a team player and taking advice of his coaching staff, who felt strongly about the player. And, you know, he's taken, for some reason, heat over it and not saying a word about it, but I'm here to tell you the true story.
That I told you earlier when I was watching this live, when that statement came out, I think I may have said out loud, like, what is he doing? Why did he just say that? I mean, this was the worst part of the whole press conference for me, just because a lot of it was, besides the Keon Coleman drama, it felt like a lot of maybe deflecting, and I know a lot of people on social media are saying that as well, as regarding the McDermott firing and coming back to this. It felt like maybe a lot of deflecting, and then to say, you know, this isn't Brandon Bean's fault, it makes it feel like you're putting some of that blame on Sean McDermott, to me. And whether or not that's how he meant it, and I think he did say it wrong, because Keon Coleman's still on the team. I don't think he's trying to bash Keon Coleman, but it didn't come off well. And it comes off to me as Brandon Bean is, you know, your guy in the situation of, you want to put McDermott and Bean against each other. You're obviously choosing Brandon Bean. It kind of feels like you're pitting this receiver who hasn't panned out to be what he wants to be, or what anybody thinks he was going to be as a first round pick. It kind of makes it feel like you're using him in this situation. I don't want to use scapegoat. I know people have been throwing that around on social media regarding McDermott, but it just feels like this was totally not the right thing to say. And as soon as he said it, I knew it was going to be what people take away from this press conference. And that's what people are going to clip, is Pegula saying this. And that's why he looked so bad to people in this press conference. So for me, this was, he did like get on the screen. Coleman completely caught astray. And now I wonder what's it going to look like for Keon Coleman moving forward? Obviously, we know the disciplinary issues have been a thing, but a lot more to discuss with Keon Coleman. Thad Brown, Josh Reed, Carl Jones did all of that on our BKL Nightly Roundtable. I'll let them take it away from Orchard Park.
Time now for the BKL Nightly Roundtable. Thad Brown, Josh Reed, Carl Jones. Not your typical roundtable. This is a whole different kind of situation for the Bills. Just Josh, Carl, give me your reaction to all that we heard today, kind of the first couple things top of mind.
Well, I thought it was really telling, and I thought it was really open of Terry Pegula to take us kind of inside the locker room and what he saw following that loss to the Broncos, and how Josh Allen was so dejected that he didn't even kind of acknowledge Terry being in there. And when Terry said a few things to him, he didn't even look up. His head was buried in his hands. He was in tears. And he said that was the moment that he realized something needed to change and that they needed to move off of Sean McDermott. And then later in the press conference, he was asked about it again and said, over the 36 hours between the end of that game and kind of then when you decided to make that decision, he was like, no, I had made it basically right then and there. I thought that was, to me, that was the thing that really stood out, that, man, he looked around that locker room that day after that game and went, something's got to change here, and it ended up being Sean McDermott.
But I also have some questions and just very curious on that thought process. For sure, I imagine that was a very emotional scene. We obviously heard from Josh Allen. You saw the clips of Deion Dawkins and the other players who were just very emotionally distraught and, quite frankly, dejected in that moment. But then later on in the press conference, Terry Pegula said they lost that game because of a bad call. So if we are getting rid of a coach who has had plenty of success here in Western New York because of a bad call, is it because of the bad call? Or is it because of the fact that you guys were ejected in the locker room? I don't know where. I leave here still kind of lost on what exactly drove to that decision. All in all, if I sitting in this spot right now, I believe Terry felt as if this was a Super Bowl or bust type of year, and they didn't reach that point. And I think the scene after the game further illustrated his decision.
It's funny you talk about this. It kind of crystallizes where I kind of land on this, in that Terry came into Buffalo kind of saying, "I'm a fan." He was a fan of the Sabres. Well, we saw a fan up there. We saw a guy who was in the locker room who reacted emotionally to his players being down. We saw a guy reacting emotionally to a call that was right, but he thinks was wrong, and he's going to hold on to that. And look, when you're the owner, you can do that stuff. You get to make those calls, and it doesn't even mean they're going to be wrong. I mean, really, the firing of Sean McDermott, how it affects the Bills is going to be almost 1,000% impacted by who the next guy is, and not necessarily what this decision was about. But I also respect the idea that when you've been doing this for so long, there has to come a point where there's a breaking point. And if it was in that locker room, and if it was an emotional reaction, and if that's where Terry Pegula went with it, then fine, I can understand it. Even if I would want a little more of, well, let me dive into the stats and try and break down personnel versus coaching, see who was better. Terry didn't do that. There was a thought amongst the fan base and social media, and you know, I kind of,
and even the media.
And the media, that's fair, yeah. But I kind of cringe at the idea of just throwing out thoughts and discussing them. But this was an interesting one, that Brandon Beane somehow engineered this, that he was the one that had been working weeks behind the scenes, getting into Terry Pegula's ear, pointing at the coaching being a problem. But today, Brandon Beane was pretty vehement. That was not the case at all.
Man, he brought up the fact that to question his integrity and his character was BS. That was exactly what he said. Like, look, you can question me on my drafting and what happened, how the wide receiver stuff played out, but to question his character, he said, it gutted him. I mean, you could tell, listening to him and watching him and his reactions, that he started turning red. Like, he was starting to get angry about that. And he even brought up his wife, Haley, and how he would go home from work and show up, and she's in tears because she's hearing his character kind of just being taken to task. And the other part of the equation is Terry basically said, look, if there was ever a power play going on inside that room, Terry was like, I would get rid of the guy that's trying to do the power play, because that does not sit well with him. So those were two of the bigger things that I took away from the whole dynamic, that there may have been a tug of war between, either Sean goes or Brandon Beane goes.
That was the most revealing thing of the press conference for me. And I know we got some answers on, hey, did Josh Allen know or not know about the firing? Hey, the decision-making, which we'll get into, of the drafting of Keon Coleman. But the fact that Terry Pegula stood up there and said, no, this was my decision only, and he said that they've had conversations just every single day. They said just in healthy discourse when you speak with head coach and GM. But this was his decision, to get rid of Sean McDermott. And I thought another revealing quote, which further drives home this point that this was solely Terry Pegula's decision, because this was something that Brandon Beane never discussed. He said, what is success? Is success making the playoffs 7 years and never reaching a Super Bowl? Brandon Beane would never, he has not to this point ever said anything of the sort. He is always proud of the fact that, hey, that we're close, we're getting there. Terry Pegula sat up there and said today, in a roundabout way, what we've done is not good enough.
I do think that there is potentially a subconscious part of this where, because Brandon Beane is the one who sits in the owner's box every single game, that there may have just been a trust factor built up, that if you're going to make a call, you're going to choose Brandon Beane. This is not nefarious. This is not going behind someone's back. This is just how humans operate. And that may have played into it. But this was the part of it, to your point, that to me was the most real. This is what I will walk away. If I'm going to believe everything or anything that came out of this press conference, Brandon Beane not doing this to Sean McDermott is the one I land on the most, for sure. So where do we go from here, guys? There was a little talk about the coaches going forward and philosophy. Is a good question about how you might have to, totally rebuild the roster to a degree if the new coach is different. Now that we've kind of gotten some answers on why this decision was made, what is your opinion on the outlook of this team going forward?
Well, I think the obvious solution, if you will, or next step would be bringing in an offensive-minded head coach. But he was asked about that and said, look, we don't want to necessarily definitely go down that road, because part of this job is being a CEO and being the face of the franchise when it comes to the coaching staff. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an offensive mind. Now, I would still lean toward it should be an offensive mind. Now, if you feel like the guy is not ready to be the CEO of your team, then I would see how you could lean away from that. But I mean, there are plenty of qualified offensive minds out there. In fact, I know I think the depth of the defensive-minded guys I think the pool's deeper on that, but I would say the higher-end guys, maybe the offensive guys, when you're talking about a Brian Dable who's already been there and done that type of thing, Joe Brady possibly, who's obviously been in your building, you know what you can expect from him. So the Jags offensive coordinator, Udinsky. There's another one. He's younger, though, so you wonder if he's ready to take on that CEO role. But look, at some point, they had faith that Sean McDermott could do it, and it was a great call. But at the end of the day, the heat is now on Brandon Beane to make this work. This is his call. This is his pick. He didn't pick Sean McDermott. He came in after Sean. So this is his guy. He's got the keys to the car. He's going to need to make sure that the car goes straight down the road.
And as we record this on Wednesday, there's been some reports about some of the candidates that they're scheduled to interview. Brian Dable's on that list. Joe Brady is on that list. But another revealing thing that Brandon Beane acknowledged towards the end of his press conference is the fact that this new head coach is going to report to him. And I think that's a new dynamic that we haven't seen here in Buffalo. Remember, Sean was here before Brandon, like you just mentioned, and that isn't the case in every building. There are a lot of buildings where there's more collaborative, or in a situation where the coach has more cachet, coach is head honcho, and the GM is more so of the guy who is just making sure that he fits to his vision. Very intriguing to me what coach you can bring in that is going to directly report to Brandon Beane without a lot of say-so. And I know Brandon said today this is always going to be collaborative, but I don't know if that's going to be the question going forward. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things where, however they land on the coach, very intrigued to see how much pull he has going forward.
The collaboration part is what I want to get to, because Brandon can say that, and I would think he believes it. I think that is how he wants to approach it. But this is different. The coach doesn't go around you and have his own reporting structure with the owner. He reports, you're responsible for everything. So you can be collaborative, but if you are going to pound the table for something, you're going to win because it's your call. So how does that make it different? What is the approach that Beane has to this job that's different to how he operated with before, when he and Sean McDermott were on equal footing? It's a whole new world for him to a degree too. When you start going through the coach's pool, I'm not impressed, and one of the things I thought about, and I posted this on X a couple days ago, was that you don't make this decision, this kind of big swing, without having the next move in mind. The Bills clearly did not. This was a move made on Saturday night, and they're going to go out and figure out what's out there. And I think what's out there is not super great. There's a bunch of coordinators who, any one of them could be fantastic coaches, but there's no Ben Johnson. John Harbaugh's already got a job. Kevin Stefanski's probably the other really good offensive mind. He's got a job. It could work, but I'm not super confident right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's going to be really interesting. And I asked Brandon Beane about the idea of having more autonomy over the draft, in particular because Keon Coleman's name got brought up. And Terry, before Brandon could answer the question, Terry said, "Let me interrupt." Keon Coleman was not Brandon Beane's idea. That was a coaching staff idea. And I think everybody kind of sat up in their seats and were like, oh, well, that's quite interesting.
And Brandon spent the rest of the press conference trying to reel that thing back in. That was his call.
Yeah, but I mean, it is kind of interesting to hear how that kind of played out. And look, we've seen drafts go by where you're like, man, they really went heavy on defense. Why didn't they address more offensive players? Well, if Sean and his staff had more say than maybe we thought, maybe Brandon goes, look, if it's all on me, then it's going to be all on me. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be the one calling the shots. He's going to continue to say collaborative, but that collaborative may be 90-10 now.
Listen, I don't know how in lockstep the staff was in their agreement on Keon Coleman should be their guy. But one of the candidates that they're going to interview is Joe Brady, and he was on the same staff when they drafted Keon Coleman. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me to keep a guy around that had some say-so, you presume, in bringing Keon Coleman here.
You start with, remember that Keon thing? Didn't go very well, did it, buddy? I mean, that's not exactly where you want to start the coaching interview. All right, we've got a lot more that will be learned, that will be understood, and will be seen. A lot of action out here in Orchard Park coming up this offseason. For Carl Jones and Josh Reed, I'm Thad Brown. Let's go back to you. All right, from me to me, we're back here on BKL Nightly. Good conversation there. One thing I want to get to and talk about a little bit. The question I've gotten the most since coming back from Orchard Park today was it really that crazy? Because this press conference is getting destroyed nationally. And My answer to that for everyone is got a couple of different parts to it. Number one, with Terry Pegula, there's a reason he doesn't go in front of a microphone too often. And you saw that today.
Yep.
Like it's just not his wheelhouse. That said, and especially talking to some of the Buffalo guys who cover him a little more when it comes to the hockey team, they felt like it wasn't all that bad. And I think so too. I think he did clear his own bar, low such as it is. Secondly, in terms of the things that were head scratchers, to put it generously, Keon Coleman, which we showed everybody, was number one. Number two was the whole theory of this, of why he fired Sean McDermott, which was he was fired because they lost the game to Denver. But then Terry also said later that they lost the game in Denver because of a bad call, which wasn't a bad call. That catch with Keon Coleman is not a catch at all. It is an interception. So those two giant things, I think, is what everybody else is latching onto. And they are not good. But outside of that, I don't think of a lot of other stuff that Terry said that was terribly off. It was explaining why there wasn't a power play. He talked about Josh Allen not really being a factor in the decision, and you can argue about how logical that was, but if that's how they handled it, fine. Talked about, like I said, how the relationship was fine. Most of the rest of it was maybe not great, but it was fine. It was not something that you'd think would become the target of a dartboard for the rest of the national football pundits.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said earlier, I think Brandon Beane had a better press conference than Pegula, but like you said, Pegula doesn't speak to the media, and he showed why. I think just people have latched onto the Keon Coleman thing, and that's what's literally going viral around social media right now, and that's why it looks so bad. I think the other thing, too, is that people are frustrated because although Pegula gave his answer and, had, like what we'd expect from him for the most part, I don't think he gave a clear answer as to why Beane is there and McDermott isn't. I think that is kind of, in my perspective, the root of why so many people are frustrated is because he did defend Beane and he did say, these are the issues and, but you don't go this far without having a good roster. You don't make this many playoffs without having a good roster. But I feel like he didn't address some of the root issues of that could be leaning more on Brandon Beane. And I think that's where a lot of people's frustration comes is because, he let go of one and promoted the other. And there wasn't a super clear, in-depth answer. And maybe that's just Pegula, that's the truth. I mean, like you said, his reason for firing McDermott was very surface level. This is what happened and this is what I did. But I think that might be where some of the frustration lies as to why Beane is still there and McDermott isn't. We didn't get like a super in-depth explanation for that.
Part of that was we did about 55 minutes, which seems like it should be enough to cover everything. It was not for this. There were still other questions that I easily could have asked. And we didn't even get to a lot of the normal end of season stuff, which would be like the David Edwards and Connor McGovern's contract is up. That would be a thing you'd want to know. What happened with the defensive line? That was even talked about once. The only position group we addressed was wide receiver. And the Josh Allen stuff wasn't talked about much. Terry Pegula said he would leave most of the conversations in-house, but said that, Josh wasn't consulted at first. So it wasn't like, it would have probably taken another half hour solidly to get to everything that you'd want to get to. Just kind of flipping through some of the other topics today. Terry Pegula addressed, is it a risk? He did say, by the way, and let me get your take on this real quick, the next coach, it will not be Super Bowl or bust, which when you think about where this franchise is at, it seems like every season is that. The last guy just got fired for falling 2 games short of the Super Bowl. I do think that was a smart thing for him to say, though, because if you bring in a first-time coach in here, which is the likely scenario right now based on who's available, first-time coaches don't generally go to the Super Bowl. If you make that guy Super Bowl or a bust, you're putting him in a terrible spot.
I agree. It just goes back to why McDermott was fired in the first place. I understand, but you said on our roundtable segment, there's no good options. I mean, this feels like something that was a rash decision, and there's not. If you're looking for a Super Bowl, which he's saying that's not the expectation for the first year. Okay, that's what you would expect him to say. But you don't have good options to set you up. I mean, McDermott couldn't get it done, but I would like to think that the person you're going to bring in, I don't know if I would feel more confident that he would be the guy looking at who's available right now.
The one thing I'll say, I'm not going to say there's not good options. The run-of-the-mill coach options, which any of them could be good. And
they're all good coaches. It's
right,
just
exactly.
When you're trying to replace, and you, like you said, he can say it's not a Super Bowl expectation, but it is. That's what it is.
And the pool is not, like I said, just to finish this up, the pool is not bad. It's just there's no Ben Johnson. There's no, that's a star in the making, ready to go. All right, we're going to have another show tomorrow, and we will talk a little more about this, I'm sure. There's still, like I said, a whole lot more to get to from this press conference today. So for Rachel Liebert, I'm Thad Brown. Thanks very much for watching. Like I said, we will be back again tomorrow to kind of wrap up the week and wrap up this explanation of what went down with Sean McDermott. We will see you then.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 On Demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.